academic writing, if you're writing a paper for college, it might be okay to use passive voice. It might be okay to have a paragraph that's 5 to 7 sentences long. And when you write a news article, you might have 1 or 2 sentences and they have to be very short per paragraph.
Do you believe that everyone has a voice as a writer, and how can students start finding theirs?
The best way you can start finding your voice is to start writing poetry, writing short stories, writing book reviews, movie reviews, whatever you feel inclined to share an opinion about.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Essay Pro podcast. Today's title is From Classroom to Newsroom: How Narrative Skills, Diverse Perspectives, and Mentorship Prepare Students for Impactful Media Careers. My name is Kennedy Porter, and today we are met with Sean Salai. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about what you do?
Sure, Kennedy. I'm the culture reporter at the Washington Times newspaper here in Washington, D.C., which means I write about stories that are related to social trends, a lot of stories about education, race, gender, also stories about economic trends involving everything from the impact of layoffs in the federal government to different sorts of legislation and bills around the country. But I don't cover politics, so I don't cover the legislature here in DC. I'm mostly focused more on sort of a lot of reports and social science reporting.
Nice. So you got a lot of writing under your belt. So Sean, I'm just going to dive into some of these questions here. What made you first kind of fall in love with journalism? Was it, say, like a class, or maybe you heard a story, or was it maybe a mentor or a teacher who inspired you?
That's a great question. It was actually when I was in high school in Indiana, and I went to a public high school south of Gary, Indiana. And I had a great teacher who was kind of a quirky, wonderful AP English composition teacher. And so he got us in the habit in class of writing a journal where we would kind of have assignments and do these written journal entries on different topics that were just ranging from our own personal interests to different things we were reading about in the class. And I would say that another thing that got me interested in writing was movies. And I love to see movies and talk about movies. And so in the
Yeah.
late 1990s, many moons ago, I had a little website where I would put up movie reviews. And I wrote a letter, an email. I wrote an email to the Chicago Sun-Times film critic, Roger Ebert, who's now passed away. And I asked him about his advice on writing. And he said, well, he actually wrote back, which was very flattering for me as a high school kid. And he said, write as much as you can, no matter what, just find an excuse to write and to find your voice and practice. And so when I was a senior in high school, I won sort of a writing award from the English department and published some poetry and was very interested in reading as well. And so I would say that love of words, that love of reading, and that interest I started to develop in writing just kind of carried me from there.
Oh, that's great, Sean. I think we have kind of similar interests. I love movies too, but I make movies, so I'm kind of getting into the field of writing. Like, I start reviewing online too, not as detailed, but it's kind of just like what I like about them. That's great. That's great to know that you can kind of segue into it through your own interests. So you mentioned a few school assignments throughout your life. Were there any particular assignments or skills that were surprisingly useful in your career when you were a student?
That's a great question. I would say that when I got to college, I was asked to write a lot of kind of social sciences. I was a liberal arts major, write a lot of kind of prose, but I also got involved in a campus student news magazine in college and became the editor. And so what I would say is that if you're a great fiction writer, sometimes it translates into news writing. Not that news writing is fiction, but simply that if you have a gift for telling a story, if you're able to kind of put things in poetry or put things in a short story, then that kind of helps you craft things in a way when you're doing journalism that are maybe more accessible to people. So a lot of what I do in my job is I have to go through these very long reports and different think tanks and government agencies, and go through a lot of I don't know how to describe it, like jargon, kinds of lots of language that has specific definitions and meanings and in ways that only the people who are working on the report would understand, or people working in government. And what I have to do is kind of translate that in a way that they'll accept, but also can be more accessible for the general reader, and kind of find a
Mhm.
plain language that people can understand. So I would say one thing I'm grateful for is that love of storytelling that I got from watching movies, and that love of talking about stories that I got from my AP composition class, and different little videos we would film for class doing Shakespeare plays or other things like that. And I would say that that love of writing is what really helped me want to take it to the next level as a professional.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of striking into that storytelling aspect of journalism. And I know from from being a student myself, that a lot of other students can find writing to be kind of boring. What tricks from journalism can make writing more exciting and fun to read? Is it kind of in the same vein as storytelling, or is there more?
Well, there are times when, in my beat that I have to write things that I'm more interested in, and times that I'm less interested in. And I would just say that it's helpful to find things that excite you and that you want to talk about early on when you're writing. And when you try to take it to the next level, part of that is just accepting that a lot of it's going to be boring. So I would say learning to be comfortable with boredom, learning to be comfortable with, okay, I'm not super interested in this topic, but I'm going to do my best to learn about it and become a quasi expert in it so I can share it with other people. That's an important skill as well as we mature as writers. If we decide I want to do this for a living, or I want to do this on a more professional level and not just kind of write stories for my friends and family or poems for class, then I have to say to myself, same thing with baseball or football or anything that's kind of a game when you're younger, that's exciting and fun when you're younger. As you get older, if you get paid to do it for a living, you're going to have to go through some things that are maybe less enjoyable. Now, you still have that basic love of your activity there, just as if you're a musician and you go play for an orchestra or a band. It's a little different once you start getting paid for it, because then you say, well, all right, so now this is something I used to do just with my friends or just for the pure enjoyment of it. I love playing basketball growing up in Indiana. I've never been good enough to get
Hey.
paid for playing basketball, but I still watch it. I'm a huge Indiana Pacers fan. But, when it comes to actually getting paid to do something for a living, I would say that just like adulting in general, it's going to be a lot of tedious moments and frustration. And another thing you have to get used to is kind of letting other people tear your writing down and build it back up and give you constructive feedback. So you kind of have to have a certain humility about it, to say that
Yeah.
maybe this looks really good to me, but I have to be open to how other people see it. And maybe there's something I didn't think of, and it's really important to me to hear that feedback and criticism.
Yeah, I think feedback's very important in any kind of creative space. Like I'm a filmmaker myself, and I think it's very important to, put your ego aside and let people view your work, I think
Yeah.
it's very important. It's great. In your opinion, Sean, what's the difference between writing for a grade in school and writing for impact in journalism?
Well, that's a great question. When you're writing for a grade in school, you've got a particular set of course expectations or assignment guidelines, and the teacher wants to see certain things. So when you're writing for a teacher, you're kind of focused on an audience of one. One of the things I learned from Aristotle's book on rhetoric was to kind of think about your audience and know your audience. And in that case, you're very constrained and you're focused on a very narrow set of expectations. When you're writing for impact, you have to kind of be broader minded and think about more than just the perspective of the teacher. So if I'm assigned to write an essay on great expectations and I'm told to analyze the themes of great expectations and talk about and now I'm really digging myself in a hole because I don't remember Great Expectations very well, but one of the great Dickens novels. But let's say I'm supposed to describe how this young man Pip grows up and the interactions he has with these different characters, the convict, Miss Havisham. Well, that's all in a very particular academic structured setting where they're looking for certain things that are accepted within the discipline of an English class. When I'm writing a story on the news, I'm writing for a broader audience, and I'm also trying to balance different perspectives. So, for example, if I'm writing about something that involves liberals and conservatives or Democrats and Republicans, which is a big polarization here in DC, I have to kind of try to get as many perspectives as I can to get a broader understanding of the topic. So I can say that I talk to people who are different ideological persuasions and sometimes just different experts or different interested parties. So if I'm writing a story about schools, maybe I would talk to some students or talk to teachers or a teachers union. And I would also talk to academics who teach education and have a perspective from that side. So, for example, I was writing a story about the Trump administration cuts to the education department. So I have to look at both what the education department has to say, and I also have to look at what the teachers groups have to say, and what people who have done research in the field have to say. And then I have to kind of present a story that is balanced and fair. Now, when I say fair, it doesn't mean it's objective. It doesn't mean I'm pretending that, this is the only version of this story, but that I'm kind of getting as much as I can from all the different parties, listening to it, and then presenting it in a way that's fair to each side. So I try to find language that will hit the reader in a way that they say, okay, I can understand that this is really how things are happening, and it's not loaded language that's biased towards one side or the other. So that's kind of a hint of what I try to do as a news reporter that's a little different from, say, when I was writing essays in college or high school.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of just like broadening it for more people, for the impact.
Yeah, broadening it and also kind of sharpening it and condensing it, So, for example, when you write prose, good storytelling helps, and there are also certain rules of journalism and certain kind of best practices that you want to take into account. So, for example, in academic writing, if you're writing a paper for college, it might be okay to use passive voice. It might be okay to have a paragraph that's 5 to 7 sentences long. And when you write a news article, you might have 1 or 2 sentences, and they have to be very short per paragraph. And you're compiling an article that's going to be maybe 700 to 900 words instead of a paper for a teacher that's going to be possibly 2,000 words. So you really want to be concise and spare in the language you use. You don't want to be too repetitive. In academic language, you can kind of be confusing and elaborate and non-committal in a lot of ways, and you can explore things and stretch it out. But when it comes to a news article, you're dealing with someone who they just want the facts. They're just there for a short period of time. They may click on an article on the internet, and if you don't grab them immediately, they're probably going to click on by and go look at something else. Exactly. So in a story, we talk about like a lead or a headline, and you want to get something that really kind of cuts to the heart of what you're reporting in a way that tries to tell the story in as few words as possible.
That's good. Yeah. Keeping it clear and concise, especially for this generation. Nobody can really focus on things. You kind of mentioned this earlier about finding your voice. You said that it's good to write every day and you kind of get into this place of your natural voice. Do you believe that everyone has a voice as a writer, and how can students start finding theirs?
Yeah, I think so. And the best way you can start finding your voice is to start writing poetry, writing short stories, writing book reviews, movie reviews, whatever you feel inclined to share an opinion about, and just get used to how you sound on paper. Sometimes how you sound on paper may be a little different from when you're talking face to face with somebody, but you can also kind of try to write the way you would talk to somebody. So to try to find like a natural expression. And a lot of times when we do that, we find we have certain tics. And so just like you might say, when you're talking, when you're writing, you might find that you repeat the same phrase, um, instead of or in lieu of, and someone else who's reading it starts to get distracted by these quirks. And so you kind of want
Yeah.
to start to notice about myself, okay, there's a certain way that I talk and a certain way that I write. And that's a baseline, that's a starting point. And now I can sort of see if I can be creative and play with that and try out different voices. And there's a lot of programs you can look at in books that can help with that. So like when I was in high school a million years ago, we read Strunk and White's The Elements of Style. And it's a little gray handbook, very much based on the idea of being spare in your prose and avoiding a lot of adjectives, or as my teacher in high school said, kill the flowers. You don't need all this flowery language for a news article or something you're trying to share to get across a point. And so that's a very simple book. I didn't have the attention span to read it in high school. It took me many years to finally sit down and read it. And it's helpful in the sense of making me think about, well, these are things that I could say in a page or things that I could say in a paragraph. And now, what's going to be most impactful for the reader? Do they really want to spend a whole page reading a very detailed description of this particular point? Or does the story really just need a line or a paragraph here from this source? More recently, there's a program called Grammarly, and Grammarly is online. You get it as an extension for your browser. Now they've added an AI feature that I'm still kind of trying to figure out. But Grammarly is a marvelous tool. And what it does is you can copy and paste your article in there, and it'll do simple things like catch typos, because none of us are immune to typos, and help you fix
Yeah.
things. It will also give you suggestions for, maybe this paragraph is a little too wordy, or you threw some things in here that don't really flow with the rest of the story. And so you can kind of be open to that. Now, that's different from just plugging an article into artificial intelligence and telling it to write a story for you. That's considered a no-no in journalism. So you're not getting the computer to write it for you. You're just kind of getting some feedback from this proofreading program. And, before I turn this in, can I just check it for typos, any mistakes, any errors? Anything in terms of grammar, if I need a comma here or don't have a punctuation mark there. And that helps us
Yeah.
as journalists in this digital age to keep up with things. Because when I started out as a news reporter over 20 years ago, it was all fax machines, it was phone calls, it was shoe leather journalism. Here at the Washington Times, we used to have everything in print. We had a print magazine, we had a print newspaper, we had a national weekly edition in print that would go out around the country. And we still have a lot of those things, but what everything revolves around now is the internet. And so
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, it was mostly print, and the internet was something that was out there, and we'd occasionally post something. But over the years, it's become now, as you know, most people get their news digitally. So you're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about, I have a digital audience here. I'm writing this to get it on the internet first. And instead of 20 years ago where I could play with an article all day and then turn it in the afternoon, now I might have to turn in something online and update the story as it goes along. So being flexible about your writing is a big key in the journalism world today, to kind of be loose and flexible and adaptable in terms of saying, well, I wrote this and now 2 hours later I have to kind of rewrite the whole thing because something changed in the news cycle, or I see it, something I can add to the story that another source sent me as a quote. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to, to keep up with the times, stay relevant, I suppose. um,
yeah.
so Sean, could you share a time when telling a story where you made a big difference in how people reacted to your article?
Sure, that's a deep question. There's big stories I've done. A couple years ago, I won the first place from the Virginia Press Association for a series on the death of the liberal arts, and it was kind of a difficult story to write because I myself have some college degrees that are in history, philosophy, theology, different areas that don't really pay well. And as we know now, a lot of people are going into STEM fields, and a lot of colleges are kind of closing English and history departments and scaling back on the humanities just because students aren't enrolling in the programs anymore. So I wrote this series about the quote unquote death of the liberal arts, talking about how the liberal arts programs are getting cut, how they're trying to survive, how they're trying to adapt. And I wrote it in a way, it was kind of a 3-part series that really resonated with a lot of people, because you could look at it and say, well, this echoes my experience. I'm someone who either went to college or thought about college or got out of high school and looked at the options. And I thought to myself, what kind of job am I going to get if I go to this degree program? And is it something I'm going to be able to use to pay back my student loans? And I talked to one college graduate from 2022, I believe, who said that, he was working 2 part-time jobs, and he had a liberal arts degree and was interning on the Hill and working at a pizza place. And then I talked to other people who had different sorts of high school educations, but when they went to college, they were looking at programs like nursing or things where they could get a job right away. And so one thing we've been doing the last few years is really rethinking the purpose of education and higher education. And there's a really kind of challenging trend on the horizon, which is that the US birth rates are going down. So there's fewer people eligible for college. College has gotten more expensive. And the question is, when I'm looking at my future as a writer or some other career, what's going to pay the bills? So writing, like anything else, is a labor of love. I'm not the highest paid person in Washington, D.C., and this is not a career that will necessarily lead you to great riches, but it's a very rewarding career if it's something that you love to do. And that was one thing that I found in this series on the liberal arts that I wrote, is that when I talked to students who majored in the liberal arts, they tended to be happy. They tended to be very content, and they were appreciative of how well-rounded it made them and how they could see the world in a more holistic way because they had read great literature or studied history or done all these different things, philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I would just tie back together with this question of being a writer and finding your voice. If you think you like it, if it's something you would enjoy, you get in the habit of doing it over and over again, you practice it. And even at that point in your life where it starts to get a little boring or maybe less as exciting than it was, you still have that deep sense of, this is something I love to do. This is something that when I do it, it's rewarding for doing it for its own sake, is the line with the liberal arts. And so a lot of liberal arts grads today, there are fewer of them. They're not getting the best paying jobs. They're not going into AI programs, but they're also folks who are going into social work or different sorts of careers that they nevertheless find deeply fulfilling. On the other hand, there's a lot of trade schools out there that are booming with enrollment right now in vocational education. And there's a growing sense that you don't necessarily need a degree in something to do it. So, for example, I wasn't a journalism major in college. I was a history major, political science minor. I did a number of journalism programs, won some Indiana Collegiate Press Association awards, and it got into some internships, and that got me into what I'm doing now, which I love. When it comes to college, I would say that whatever you love doing, find an internship that connects with it. And that's probably going to be most likely to make what you love something that can pay the bills and sustain you in the long term. And things are very different now than when I went to college and maybe when you were going through school, if you're still in school, Kennedy, but it's just a different situation. Yeah.
I graduated recently, so I mean, I'm still figuring it out. I'm kind of learning the ropes, figuring out the world still. So yeah, I can imagine it was a little different back then.
Yeah. So you just graduated undergraduate from college, or?
Yeah, undergraduate from Loyola Marymount University. I
Okay.
Bachelor of Arts.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I got
Yeah.
a Master of Arts from Loyola Chicago and spent
Nice.
some time
Loyal
with the
family.
Jesuits. Oh yeah, for sure.
Cool.
So,
Yeah.
and that's another example. Like a lot of these private schools are liberal arts oriented, and they give you that space to explore. And writing is, unless you're doing science and technology writing, it's a very kind of humanities oriented field. So,
Of course. Now, me and you, we both know the term writing is rewriting. And as a screenwriter, kind of myself, the editing process can be, the bulk of the work. What lessons can students take away from your process? What is your process? Like, what's one simple editing tip that could maybe instantly improve their work, would you say?
one simple editing tip is just double check, triple check, reread, and really pay attention when you read something again. So, as I'm constructing a story and adding more things to it, I may need to reread it several times and on a fairly short deadline to get it in. And it pays off every time because if you don't reread something, even if you're using Grammarly or some other program, you may have some mistake in there, or you may have problems with the story that you didn't think about, that maybe it needs to be structured differently, or you're kind of trying to make the headline or the lead say more than what the story says, and you have to kind of rework how you do it. But I would just say that you can never look at something too many times unless it
Yeah.
becomes compulsive and you're perpetually indecisive. You also have to be able to just pull the trigger and turn it in at some point. And the
Hmm.
other thing is to just get other people to look at your writing. You know, the more folks you have giving you feedback on your writing, the better writer you'll be. I know that any gifts I have as a writer are because I got a lot of feedback from people in school and in my job with wonderful editors here at the Times and elsewhere that I've worked with. And so you really have to kind of say to yourself, okay, I wrote this, I feel pretty good about it, but let me see what someone else thinks about this. And if they have
Hmm.
feedback on it, they may not deliver it in a nice way. It may seem pretty abrupt or harsh, but I really have to be open to this because it's going to make me a better writer. And maybe I'll disagree with it and I'll just trust that someone else is seeing something that I don't see. And I'll think about it, I'll try to address it in the story, and that will kind of make me expand in terms of my own capabilities and how I think about things. So to just always be learning from reading your own stuff and from other people what they say about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. It's good to have people in your circle who you can trust to kind of give you honest feedback. Um, you mentioned a little bit about fact checking. How can students build good fact checking habits in their essays or research?
Yeah, it's a real issue, especially now with AI and deep fakes. And we're getting to the point now where we get a lot of press releases at the newspaper, a lot of groups emailing us, and they're not always trustworthy. Sometimes they're scams. And in order to avoid getting snared in that, and I've had issues with it myself, where a year or two ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, there was a press release about a ecologically ecologically sensitive Barbie doll that was going to be made out of recyclable material. And the Hollywood actress Daryl Hannah actually created a fake press release and a fake video. And she put this out as if it was Mattel that was creating these Barbies. And it turned out to be kind of a publicity stunt. But I myself and a couple other agencies wrote a quick story and published it, and then later had to take that down and write about the stunt because what happened
Yeah.
was, it was a very realistic looking video that was really her in it. And at the same time, Mattel had nothing to do with it. And she was trying to
Uh-oh.
raise awareness about ecology and the climate and this and that, kind of an anti plastics message. So, one thing that you can do is just always double check things. And if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. It seemed
Yeah.
like a spicy headline. A lot of us thought, oh, this is a no brainer. And I just happened to be the one who jumped at it early in the morning, probably hadn't had my coffee, and turned that in and kind of looked dumb. Well, you can learn from your mistakes as a journalist. So in this case, we do have so many things that look realistic that aren't realistic anymore. So there's a few things you can do. Number one is check the organization. If you're getting something that is a well-recognized organization within the United States, like if you're writing a story on education and it's from the Rand Corporation, if you know the sources, you know it's legitimate and you can generally trust their information. If you get something that's from a company you've never heard of, that's based in Israel or based in another country, not to single out Israel, but you have to question it. And you have to say, why is this company that's based in Ukraine or Israel or based in Russia, why are they sending me something commenting on the US real estate market? Is that really the best source for the US real estate market? And even if
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, I'm going to have to just be skeptical and say, everybody who's coming to me as a reporter or as a journalist, they have an angle or they have an agenda, and there's something they're trying to get across. And sometimes it's just a simple conflict of interest where you say that here's a study showing that, Oreos are the best candy to eat, and it happens to be put out by the Oreo company. So you have to kind of
Bias.
question. Yeah, exactly. You kind of have to ask yourself, okay, is this something I can use in my article? Is it an appropriate source? Is it real? Is it something that's respected? And if I'm not sure, I need to check. So if I don't know about a source or I found a website that seems legitimate, maybe I can just call them up, ask about it, check on fact-checking websites, check for media bias. There's different tools out there that you can use to look up something if it seems like it's just a fake website that's aggregating stuff with an AI bot. It may not be the
Yeah.
best source of an article. They may repeat an article that was actually published in the Atlantic or the New York Times or National Review, and it may not actually be their article. So you have to see what's the original source for this. And just ask as many questions as you can and trust your gut if something seems like it's not real. And it's possible to make a mistake. Things are getting harder to catch now. And now they can even fake videos of people and things like that, as you know. So we have to even be
Yeah.
careful about stuff that's put on social media. You might say,
It's
oh,
crazy.
that's a video of President Trump or Senator Schumer saying something. And then you find out it's doctored. So just be slow to put something up.
Exactly. It's crazy the times we're living in. I mean, kind of along the same vein of fact checking, have you ever had to completely kind of change a story because you discovered a fact that didn't fit?
That's a good question. So occasionally you will have things you need to correct. So we do have corrections in the news business for a reason. And it can be a range of things. So, for example, it's not unheard of that I've written a story and a source told me something based on their own report and they misstated it. So then I get
Oh,
an email from them saying, okay, I gave you the wrong number. You need to put this other number in. So you have to like put the number into the story online and right at the bottom, this story has been corrected to fix these numbers that were incorrect in an earlier version of this story had the wrong numbers. Sometimes if
yeah.
it's an editing error, then an editor would make, you would say an editing error resulted in this. In other cases, you might find yourself kind of trying to track down some information that is just giving more context for something. So, for example, you might have the information that's accurate in itself, but you need a little more context for it. So, you might say that, you know, real estate home listings in the DC area have gone up by 64% since last year. Depending on the story, if that's a real deep dive, you might want to say 64% from what to what and include that
Mhm.
extra information. So you can always add something to a story that kind of paints a fuller picture without having to issue a correction. So those are
Mhm.
actually pretty common things in my experience and sometimes you just write something down wrong or you just make a mistake and you have to fix it online. Now, responsible journalism would suggest that you don't just switch stories online without telling people. And that's why we have a process in place to have, say, this story was updated or this story has been corrected to reflect this, which is the other situation where you might write about an active shooter or a situation going on with a crime. And as the story develops, you have to go in and add more information. And sometimes earlier versions of the story, they put out something that the police said that wasn't true or that a source claimed on social media. So you always want to say, if it's not your information and if it's not something everybody's reporting, you want to say, according to so-and-so, they saw this at the crime scene. And then later on,
Exactly.
you can fix that without having to say, oh my gosh, I claimed that, and now I'm the one who has to be corrected. So you always
Yeah.
want to cover your bases.
I feel like that's pretty essential, especially with, some of the events that have happened over the past month and stuff. It's a lot of continuous reporting and a lot of new facts coming up,
Yeah.
that kind of fits into my next question. In your opinion, Sean, why do journalists care so much about showing different perspectives? And can you share a story about from your career where you listened to another perspective and that kind of changed your approach?
Sure. Well, it's important just to be as complete as we can in telling a story. So, one
Mhm.
thing I learned as a student when I was a history major in college is that a lot of times history is written by the victor. So you look at, for example, study the American Civil War, and the here in Virginia, in the DC area, we have a battle called Bull Run, which was an early battle in the Civil War, which was called the Battle of Manassas on the southern side. And so the North won the North wrote the history books, and you can get completely different versions of the Civil War if you read what the Confederates or the Southerners wrote. Now, in modern times, if you're writing a history of the Civil War, you would try to include all of those sources. You would say, well, here's what the South was saying in the Southern newspapers, here's what the North was saying, and it wouldn't be as loaded as, say, the uh, memoirs of Admiral Raphael Semmes of the Confederate Navy, if that was your only version of the war. So you want to
Yeah.
kind of really try to help people understand, like, okay, this person is being straight with me. An important reason is just earning the reader's trust. You want the
Mhm.
readers to trust that you're giving them the story straight, that you're not selling something or pushing an angle. And to be honest, a lot of journalists don't do that anymore because we have advocacy journalism now. And so everybody with the social media platform might say, I'm a journalist because I'm filming videos and posting about it, or I have a Substack. Or
Mhm.
now, in to some extent, that's journalism. At the same time, we would call that opinion journalism. So, in a traditional newspaper setting, you have the news section and you have the opinion section. So, you have an op ed. A lot of groups now that are political pressure groups or different kinds of advocacy groups, they now have their own news sites. So here in DC, the Conservative Heritage Foundation has something called the Daily Signal, or the Liberal Brookings Institution might put something out. And so you have to read it. It's written like a news story, and sometimes people are out there pushing stories, but they're only telling one side of the story. And
Yeah.
that sells in a lot of cases. That gets you more clicks because we have something called confirmation bias these days, where people raised in a digital age tend to only want to read the things they agree with. And so sometimes those can drive money and drive clicks and drive advertising revenue, which
Mhm.
is, that's their business model. That's what they do. And at the same time, you get a very slanted and biased sense of a story from that. So in my own case, I would say that working for a traditional newspaper that tries to report things fairly, but in the opinion section leans a little bit to the right. What we try to do at the Washington Times is to say, we're going to be fair to both sides. If we're not fair to both sides, it's because I didn't quite make enough effort to go out and get the other side's opinion. So, for example, when I'm writing a story, I might get one side that's flooding me with information and the other side is not eager to comment. I need to go through all the extra efforts I can to reach out to the other side. A few days
Mhm.
ago, the National Education Association, the nation's largest teachers union, they were placed under investigation by a House Republican panel here in Washington that was looking into whether they were exploiting teacher retirement benefits.
Mhm.
Well, I wrote that story and I tried to include comments from the NEA. They didn't respond to me. So I had to say that I reached out for comment. And then the next step is I go through the records and try to find quotes from their website and quotes from their health insurance provider's website that kind of give a little bit of their side of the story. So that's a real simple example of making a story better by allowing people to hear both sides. That doesn't mean both sides are right or that I'm, judging which side is right. Sometimes you have to make judgment calls, though, and exclude something that might be too fringe or too tangential to a story. At the same time, I want to be able to say to my reader, you can trust this, you can read it, you can disagree with some things certain people say, agree with other things. Another challenging thing to cover the last few years was the abortion issue. And after
Mm.
the overturn of Roe v. Wade, just trying to figure out whether abortions were going up or down in different states, and just being honest about that and reporting the numbers and what we saw. And to do that in an accurate way, because it's such a contentious issue, I would write things that maybe sometimes pro-life people wouldn't like, or pro-choice people wouldn't like because it didn't fit certain narratives. But I had to kind of get to the sources who were right down the middle and could say, well, whether you like it or not, you can say that abortions went up nationally, that abortion pills are becoming very common, and at the same time, abortions went down quite a bit in the states that restricted it. And another layer is we don't really have all the facts because the federal government doesn't really have great reporting on it. The biggest abortion providing state, California, doesn't report its numbers to the federal government. And now we have the question of whether women who are getting abortions when they're taking a pill for it are reporting it at all. A lot more abortions may be happening that are unreported. And so it's a very sticky issue to report. And I have to do my best to kind of find people who crunch the numbers and look at the stats and can give you an intelligent perspective on it, whether it's the Pro-Choice Society for Family Planning or the federal CDC numbers or the Guttmacher Institute, which is also a pro-choice group, or the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which is a pro-life group. And so you kind of have to look at all of that and say, a lot of people want to use this issue to kind of make a statement about something, but we're just going to report the best we know from what's happening on the ground, that the numbers that are being collected either in surveys of abortion clinics or direct kind of medical provider claims, things like that. So,
Okay. All right. Um, Kind of switching lanes a bit. Um, Earlier, you mentioned having teachers in your life who were kind of impactful to you. So this next question is kind of a little bit of a loaded one, but who were some of your mentors who shaped your career, and what did you learn from them? And also, if a student doesn't have a mentor yet, how could they find one or even learn from people they admire from a distance?
that's a great question. There was my AP composition teacher in high school, Phil Barlow, and he was kind of a
Mhm.
crotchety old guy who would come into class, and he had held all kinds of different jobs in his life before he ended up teaching, and so he had a very interesting life. And he just had a great sense of humor and a great love of writing and reading that was just kind of infectious. And a lot of us in that class, it was an advanced placement class in a public high school. That was something we looked forward to every day when we went to school, was just, here's a guy who's just enthusiastic, who loves what he's doing. And if you want to find a mentor, sometimes it's just a matter of finding who's that person in your life who gets you excited about something. And when you
Mhm.
talk to them, do they have the time to talk about what they love with you and have a little one-on-one time? And if you're interested in pursuing something professionally, to kind of just start thinking of the questions, like if I want to become a news reporter, or if I want to become a blogger or a social media influencer, or whatever I want to do with myself and my self-expression, what are the sort of steps I would need to take to do that? And so who around me would be someone who could point me in the right direction, or maybe even point me to other mentors or other possible people I can talk to. And then that may also spill into choosing a college or a college program or vocational training if I want to do something after high school, or look into something that might move me in the direction I want to go in. So just to kind of, yeah, I mean, young people are smart, young people are bright, and they know how to do this exactly. It's just kind of trusting your native intuition, and finding that person that you just kind of vibe with, and spending a lot of time with them, and seeing if it leads you to where you want to go in terms of possible career or possible hobby. There's also people who just write as a hobby. They might take a job in finance or something that pays a little better, and yet still find a way to write for a blog, or uh, write for some kind of other venue. So
Yeah, yeah, it's great. Um, I mean, we've kind of been touching on the whole time about like, you know, writing every day and having mentors and positive people in your life. So my question is, what first steps can students take if they're curious about journalism or media? Is it primarily what you just said about having mentors and writing every day, or is there some other steps they can take?
yeah, I think if you're interested in journalism, and you've already got that baseline of, I'm enjoying writing, I'm loving all this other stuff. I'm kind of writing about topics I love, but I want to go into journalism more specifically. Join a school newspaper. That's the first step. If you have a school paper or a school website that you can write for, or school social media channel that you can do things on, find that and see how it fits. Even a yearbook, just find some way to take your love of writing and start connecting it to the things that would be traditional pathways into journalism. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other step would be, pay attention to journalists that you enjoy reading. Whether you're a print journalist or a radio or a TV journalist, you can also watch people online that you really like, in terms of news anchors or people who have a channel that you enjoy following, or podcast or radio program. So just find somebody you like and notice what they do and how they do it. And then
Mm-hmm.
try to find out what was their path to this, and how can I follow suit or explore that as an option in my life. And that's probably the simplest way. When I was in high school, there was a columnist in Chicago named Mike Royko, who wrote for, I'm going to botch it, either the Sun Times or the Tribune. And he was just a very kind of beloved sort of populist columnist for the newspaper. And I used to read his columns, and I had a book of his columns that I got in high school and read. So, just find somebody that you see yourself in, and that you would like to follow that path. And maybe it'll be a springboard to other things. You might not end up as that person, you'll end up as yourself, but it'll be worth the effort.
That's great. That's good. It's good to have people you kind of look up to in any field. I mean, I'm a screenwriter and director, so it's nice to have, I have writers that I admire. I also have filmmakers I admire, and kind of pulling from each of those people to kind of find your own path. I love that.
Yeah.
Um,
So, like, how did that work for
yeah,
you?
I mean, it's working out great. Like I'm a really big enjoyer of Brian De Palma films, and one of my friends, he's a novelist, so I kind of talk to my novelist friend and I watch a lot of Brian De Palma movies, and it kind of shapes my narrative and the stuff I like to make. And I directed my first short this summer, and
Oh,
I'm finding my voice. It's good. It's good to hear it coming
congratulations.
from you as well. Thank
So
you,
that would
thank you.
that would be like stuff like The Untouchables, or
Um, it's similar. I mean, honestly, I can't even place it. It's kind of like it's more of like noir thriller vibes.
yeah,
So I love dark stuff, but I also love like voyeuristic cinema. Like Brian De Palma does a lot of like voyeuristic, and he's inspired by Hitchcock, who does a lot of that stuff
yeah,
as well. It's kind of like a chain. You know what I mean?
yeah, for
Interesting.
sure.
hmm so Sean, what advice do you have for students who maybe want to explore internships or freelancing or other entry points into media? We kind of touched on it a bit already, but just wanted to get specific with it.
Sure. Well, I would say one step is identifying a media market that has a great demand. So, like Washington,
Mhm.
D.C., New York, Los Angeles. For sure, DC is a place that in college I gravitated towards. So, there's an internship called the Fund for American Studies here in DC, which has a number of different internship programs. One of them is a journalism program. And what they'll do is they'll bring you to a university in the DC area. I think they go to George Mason University in Virginia. You take a couple summer classes, journalism ethics, maybe another course, and then they put you in an internship where you actually intern at a journalism outlet for the summer. There's other
Mhm.
programs like that where all you have to do is just Google DC journalism internship and you can find something. And sometimes the magazines or the newspaper or the website will hire directly. The other thing is New York. New York is a big city. A lot of people gravitate towards it. I've never spent a whole lot of time there, although I did work for America Magazine in Manhattan for 7 years. That was mostly on a remote job, although I spent a summer there. So you want to think to yourself, if I'm going to make a living as a journalist, where are the places where there are a lot of jobs? And, if you're thinking of being a journalist, you could get your start on local radio or TV in a place like Cleveland, Ohio. But if you want to be a print journalist, you probably want to think about going to a bigger city that has a much larger number of publications. And depending on what you cover, if you want to cover Hollywood, you probably want to be in LA and write about it there. But if you want to cover politics, come to DC. If you want to cover something else, go to New York. And you can even go overseas. I did a foreign correspondent course in the Czech Republic and spent some time visiting with the Voice of America and writing an article that summer about the beer industry in the former Czechoslovakia when I was in college. So internships are great, and internships are really, I would say, the best way into a job. I myself was an intern at the Washington Times in the summer of 2002, and then came back a couple more times, and now I've been back for the last 4 years as of this month, as of last month. So really, it's internships are the best way to go. If you want to learn something and do it, the best way is to just start practicing it and doing it. And in your internship, to seek out mentors and to be bold and take a few risks and try different things. And you could say, okay, maybe I'd come back at this place and work one day. And places tend to be very generous with hiring folks they know who they've trained. So that's also an incentive if you have an internship at a place you really like. I don't know if you ever did any internships when you were at Marymount.
Um, I did a little bit during COVID. I was kind of in between careers at the time. So originally, I kind of wanted to get into music. So I did a internship at this record label as an A&R. But I quickly discovered that I love storytelling, and so I went to acting, and then from acting into directing and writing. So it's been an interesting path for sure. And speaking of kind of directing and writing, besides a newsroom, where else, in your opinion, can strong writing and storytelling skills open doors for young people today?
Well, I would say the internet, that's almost a cliche, but just find something online that you could write for. There's all kinds of little blogs, film blogs if you're in Hollywood or Los Angeles. You can also create your own social media channel and practice publishing things that just your friends read. But really, digital's a big gateway to a lot of things today. It's not necessarily easy to monetize that, but it can give you that sort of practice and that experience of getting feedback from other people. So there's people out there who write books and self-publish them on Amazon, and they sort of promote those books on Facebook and X and Instagram and different places and interact. So really, writing today is so much easier than it was before you and I came of age because of the internet. You don't have to wait to send in an article to a magazine and wait for them to tell you whether they'll publish it or not. You can just get online and start writing. Now, at the same time, that gives you some caution because you want to say, well, can I be responsible in what I'm writing online, and can I, stick with things that are, experimenting with my creativity, but in a useful way. I don't want to put anything online that's going to get me uh, banned on social media, or that's moving in a
Canceled.
darker direction.
Yeah,
So,
I don't want to get canceled.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, kind of in the similar vein of that, we both know that the media world is changing pretty fast. What skills do you think will matter most for students who want to work in journalism in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's always the same answer. It's a combination of the traditional bedrock skills and also the latest technology. So,
Mhm.
to work in journalism today, you really want to have a basic foundation, in a sense of, how do I construct a piece of writing? Do I have some basic essay skills? Do I have some basic writing skills? Do I have a basic sense of how to interview someone and take notes, or, reach out to different places? Do I know, where to look to get comments or quotes for something? And can I
Mhm.
kind of be a detective in that way of tracking down people who know stuff about the topics I'm covering? So you want to kind of have those skills, which have always been around in journalism, at least for 100 years, of just, developing sources, constructing articles, quoting people, and trying to be fair to both sides. On the other hand, you also want to learn as much as you can about technology. A lot of what we do today is not simply for print, but you have to be willing to do videos. You have to be willing to be in
Mhm.
front of the camera. You have to be willing to do podcasts. Excuse me. And you also maybe want to start learning a little bit about artificial intelligence, not in a way that
100%.
you would necessarily be expecting to write articles with it, but just to be familiar with it, because it's something that's going to be shaping the landscape these next few years. And if you're more aware of how it works, then you're more aware of the pitfalls and the promise, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, especially with like prompt writing, I feel like that's very important just to kind of get outputs you want with it. Because prompt writing is it's complicated, Sometimes it takes the words you mean literally, and sometimes you got to shape it in a way that gets the best response from it. It's interesting. Yeah, I definitely heard about that being an upcoming, I guess, career opportunity for people learning how to write prompts. Very interesting.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, Sean. Last question. You ready?
I'm ready.
He's ready. Perfect. Okay. Finally, if you could give one piece of advice to a student who dreams of making an impact with their writing, what would it be?
Write. Just write as much as you can for anybody. Just write, even if nobody reads it, even if it's just a journal or a diary, or you're planning the next great American novel and nobody's seen it yet. Just write as much as you can. And it's like everything. It's a muscle. You exercise it. And just like, people look at Michael Jordan, who a lot of people think was the
Mm-hmm.
GOAT in basketball. Now, I thought Reggie Miller was the GOAT, but maybe I'm in the minority there. But when you look at a guy like Michael Jordan, he didn't get that good at basketball just, overnight. He spent years of repetitious practice, a lot of tedious, hard work. He was the first guy in the gym, the last one to leave. And he was such a perfectionist that can have its own pitfalls. At the same time, you just really need to get in the habit. And once you get in the habit of something, it gets easier, and you build up a rhythm, and it carries you through. So I would just say write as much as you can and keep writing is my only piece of advice.
Wow, that's great advice. Thank you, Sean. And for our listeners out there, remember to use code 20thread for 20% off your first order with SA Pro. And on that note, I guess we're done. Thank you so much for joining us, Sean.
Thank you, Kennedy. Good to be with you.